What should have been the happiest day of my life turned into a nightmare I'll never forget. I was standing in my wedding dress, surrounded by everyone I loved, when my mother-in-law burst through the church doors screaming that I had stolen her precious family heirloom. In that moment, I watched my perfect day and my entire future crumble before my eyes. The morning of October 15th dawned crisp and clear in Newport, Rhode Island. Golden autumn leaves danced in the gentle breeze. As I stood before the mirror in the bridal suite of St. Mary's Cathedral, hardly believing this day had finally arrived. The antique stained glass windows cast rainbow patterns across my ivory dress, and the distant sound of waves crashing against the shoreline provided a peaceful backdrop to my racing thoughts. The scent of fresh roses and lilies filled the air, mixing with the familiar musty sweetness of old wood and centuries of prayers that seemed to linger in these hallowed walls. "You look absolutely radiant," whispered Rachel, my best friend since college, as she adjusted my veil. We caught each other's eyes in the mirror and shared a knowing smile. 5 years ago, she had introduced me to Michael at a charity gala benefiting local veterans, and now here we were. That night felt like yesterday. Him in his perfectly tailored suit, me in a borrowed dress I could barely afford on my nurse's salary, both of us gravitating toward each other despite the crowds of Newport's elite surrounding us. The cathedral's old wooden floors creaked beneath my feet as I paced, butterfly-like nerves fluttering in my stomach. Everything was perfect. The flowers, white roses and blue hydrangeas, the music, a string quartet playing softly in the background, and most importantly, the man waiting for me at the altar. Michael, with his kind eyes and infectious laugh, had swept me off my feet from our very first date at that little seafood restaurant overlooking the harbor. He hadn't cared that I came from a middle-class family in Providence, or that my idea of fine dining was more diner than Michelin star. He loved me for who I was, even if his family had their reservations. I touched the delicate pearl necklace at my throat, my grandmother's, worn by 3 generations of brides in my family. The something old I had chosen so carefully, despite Victoria's not-so-subtle hints about the diamond necklace she had worn at her own wedding. My mind drifted to Michael's mother, and how she had seemed increasingly distant during the wedding preparations. She came from old money, and had always been particular about maintaining certain standards, but I had hoped that today, at least, she would set aside her reservations. "The flowers need more baby's breath," she had said during the final rehearsal yesterday, her voice carrying that familiar note of disapproval, and the tablecloths really should have been silk instead of cotton blend. Each comment had felt like a tiny pinprick, but I had smiled and nodded, determined to keep the peace. After all, she was about to become my mother-in-law. 10 minutes, called out my sister Emma, poking her head through the door. She was beaming, her bridesmaid's dress matching the deep blue of the October sky outside. "Dad's ready whenever you are." Her eyes were already glistening with happy tears, and I felt my own starting to well up. Emma had been my rock throughout the entire planning process, defending my choices when Victoria's criticism became too much, reminding me that this day was about Michael and me, not about living up to Newport's social expectations. Rachel hurried to dab at my eyes with a tissue. "Don't you dare cry yet," she scolded playfully. "I spent an hour on this makeup." She adjusted my veil one last time, making sure the delicate lace fell perfectly around my shoulders. The dress had been my one big splurge, a classic A-line gown with vintage-inspired beading that had made me feel like a princess the moment I tried it on. Victoria had pushed for something more modern, more suitable for a Kennedy-adjacent wedding, as she put it, but for once I had stood my ground. I took one final look in the mirror, smoothing down my dress. The cathedral's bells began to chime, their deep, resonant tones echoing through the stone walls. This was it, the moment I had dreamed of since Michael had proposed on that moonlit beach last year. He had gotten down on one knee in the sand, waves crashing behind him, stars twinkling above, and promised to love me forever. In that perfect moment, I had believed that nothing could ever come between us. If only I had known that in less than an hour, those same bells would be drowned out by accusations that would shatter everything I had built with Michael. That my perfect October wedding would become the day that changed my life forever, just not in the way I had imagined. The old saying warns to beware the calm before the storm, but I was too caught up in my happiness to see the darkness gathering on the horizon. The wedding march began to play, its familiar notes floating through the cathedral's vaulted ceiling. My father squeezed my hand, his eyes glistening with pride as we took our positions behind the heavy wooden doors. Through the crack between them, I could see glimpses of our guests, nearly 300 of Newport's finest, most of them Michael's family friends and business associates, mixed with my much smaller circle of loved ones. "Ready, sweetheart?" Dad whispered, his voice catching slightly. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump of emotion in my throat. This man had worked double shifts at his construction company for 20 years to put Emma and me through college, had supported every dream I'd ever had, and now he was about to give me away to start my own family. The doors swung open, and the congregation rose as one. The afternoon sun streamed through the stained glass windows, creating halos of colored light that danced across the faces of our guests. My heart swelled as I caught sight of Michael at the altar, handsome in his tailored tuxedo, beaming at me with those warm brown eyes I'd fallen in love with. We had made it halfway down the aisle when the first sign of trouble appeared. I noticed movement near the side entrance of the cathedral, where Victoria was supposed to be seated in the front row. Instead, she was standing, her face flushed, red, whispering frantically to one of the ushers. Something about her expression made my stomach clench with anxiety, but I forced myself to keep smiling, to keep walking toward Michael. 3 more steps. 2. 1. My father placed my hand in Michael's, and I felt the familiar warmth of his grip. The priest opened his mouth to begin the ceremony, but before he could speak, a sharp voice cut through the reverent silence. "Stop! Stop this right now!" The voice belonged to Victoria. She was striding down the side aisle, her expensive heels clicking against the stone floor like angry exclamation points. Her face was contorted with rage, her perfectly styled hair coming loose around her face. In her hand, she clutched her designer purse like a weapon. "Victoria!" Michael turned, confusion written across his face. "Mother, what are you— How dare you?" she shouted, pointing a manicured finger directly at me. "How dare you stand there in white, pretending to be innocent?" Her voice echoed off the cathedral walls, making several guests gasp. "You think you can steal from me and get away with it?" The blood drained from my face as 300 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me. What?" I managed to stammer, my voice sounding small and frightened in the vast space. "My grandmother's sapphire brooch." Victoria's voice rose even higher. "The one that's been in our family for 4 generations. The one I was going to wear today. It's gone, and you're the only one who could have taken it." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas, seeping into every corner of the cathedral. I felt Michael's hand go slack in mine, and that small withdrawal of support hurt more than Victoria's words. "Mrs. Carson," Rachel stepped forward from her position as maid of honor. "There must be some mistake. Sarah would never—" "Mistake?" Victoria laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made me flinch. "The only mistake was my son thinking he could marry someone so far beneath our family's standing. I knew from the start you were after our money, our position in society. But I never thought you'd stoop to outright theft." "Mother!" Michael finally found his voice, but it wasn't the strong defense I'd hoped for. Instead, he sounded uncertain, torn. "Are you sure it's missing? Could it be somewhere else?" "I checked everywhere," Victoria spat. "I wanted to wear it today, to welcome your bride into our family properly." Her lips curved into a cruel smile. And when I went to get it from my jewelry safe this morning, it was gone. The same safe that you, she pointed at me again, saw me open 2 days ago when I was showing you my wedding album. The memory of that moment hit me like a physical blow. Victoria had indeed shown me her safe, filled with glittering family heirlooms, while pointedly commenting on how she hoped I would appreciate the responsibility of carrying on our family's traditions. But I hadn't touched anything, had barely even looked inside before she closed it again. I didn't take anything, I said, my voice stronger now as anger began to replace shock. I would never— Search her room, Victoria demanded, addressing the stunned congregation like a queen, commanding her subjects. Search her belongings. That brooch is worth more than she makes in a year. She probably thought she could sell it, pay off some of her student loans, perhaps? The cruel insinuation about my financial status caused another wave of whispers among the guests. I saw several of Michael's aunts exchanging knowing looks, as if Victoria's accusations confirmed their worst suspicions about their nephew's choice of bride. "This is ridiculous!" My father's voice boomed out as he stepped forward protectively. "My daughter is not a thief. How dare you make these accusations without any proof?" But the damage was already done. I could feel my perfect day crumbling around me like the ancient stones of the cathedral themselves. And worse than the accusations, worse than the whispers and stares, was the look on Michael's face as he turned to me. Doubt, clear as day, in the eyes of the man who was supposed to love and trust me above all others. The cathedral had erupted into chaos. The string quartet had stopped playing, their silence more deafening than any music. Guests were standing up in their pews, craning their necks to watch the drama unfold at the altar. I could hear the rapid-fire clicks of phone cameras, and the thought of this humiliation being recorded made me feel physically ill. "Michael," I turned to him, reaching for his hand again. "You know me. You know I would never steal anything." My voice was pleading, desperate for him to be the man I thought I knew, the man who was supposed to stand by my side through better or worse. But Michael took a small step back, running his hands through his carefully styled hair. I don't know what to think, Sarah." His words felt like ice water in my veins. "That brooch means everything to my family. My great-grandmother brought it over from England when she fled during the war. It's priceless." "More priceless than your bride's reputation?" Rachel demanded, stepping closer to me. "More priceless than trust?" Victoria seized on Michael's uncertainty like a shark scenting blood. "Search her things," she demanded again. "The bridal suite, her apartment, everywhere. She must have hidden it somewhere." "No one is searching anything," my father interjected, his face red with anger. "You want to make accusations? Call the police. Let them handle it. But I won't stand here and watch you terrorize my daughter on what should be the happiest day of her life." The word police seemed to echo through the cathedral, causing another wave of whispers among the guests. I saw Michael's father, Charles, finally stand up from his front row seat. He had remained surprisingly quiet until now, but his face was grave as he approached us. "Perhaps," he said in his measured lawyer's voice, "we should all step into the vestry and discuss this privately." He gestured toward a wooden door to the left of the altar. "This isn't a matter for public speculation." "There's nothing to discuss," Victoria snapped. "That brooch has been in my family for generations, and she jabbed a finger at me again. Saw exactly where I kept it. She's been trying to prove she belongs in our world since the day Michael brought her home, and when she couldn't manage it honestly, that's enough." I surprised myself with the force of my own voice. The tears that had been threatening now spilled over, but they were tears of anger rather than sadness. "I have spent the last 2 years trying to fit into your world, Victoria. I've smiled through your criticism, your helpful suggestions, your constant reminders that I'm not good enough for your son. But I never complained because I love Michael, and I thought that would be enough. I turned to Michael, my voice breaking. I thought our love would be enough. But you're standing there actually believing I could do this. After everything we've been through together? Michael's face was a mask of torment. Sarah, please understand. This brooch. It's been in our family for generations, yes, I know. I cut him off. You keep saying that. But I've been hearing about your family legacy since the day we met. The Carson family name, the Carson family traditions, the Carson family expectations. When does it end, Michael? When do I become more important than a piece of jewelry? It's not just jewelry, Victoria interjected. But I wouldn't expect someone like you to understand. Someone like me? I laughed bitterly. You mean someone who worked her way through nursing school? Someone who spends her days actually helping people instead of just throwing charity galas? Someone who loves your son for who he is, not for his family name? The cathedral had grown so quiet you could hear the autumn leaves scratching against the stained glass windows. Even Victoria seemed momentarily taken aback by my outburst. If you want to search my things, fine, I continued, my voice trembling, but clear. Search everything. Call the police. Check the security cameras I'm sure you have all over your house. Do whatever you need to do. But know this, the fact that you're even considering I could do this, that's something I'll never forget. I turned back to Michael, who was staring at me with a mixture of shock and something else. Was it admiration or regret? I couldn't tell anymore. And you, Michael. I've spent 2 years trying to be good enough for your family. But I never thought I'd have to prove I was good enough for you. I never thought you'd doubt me like this. Rachel stepped forward, placing a protective arm around my shoulders. Sarah, let's get out of here. You don't have to stand here and defend yourself against these ridiculous accusations. But before I could move, Michael finally spoke again. Wait, he said, his voice strained. Maybe. Maybe if we just looked in your things, cleared this up right now. And there it was, the final crack in my perfect dream, the moment I knew nothing would ever be the same. The man I loved, the man I thought would always stand by my side, was choosing his mother's suspicions over his trust in me. I reached up slowly and removed my grandmother's pearl necklace, letting it pool in my palm. You know what the worst part is? I said softly. I actually thought love could bridge any gap, that it didn't matter where we came from, as long as we were going to the same place. I pressed the necklace into his hand, ignoring his startled expression. I guess I was wrong. The weight of my grandmother's pearls seemed to linger in the air between us as Michael stared at them in his palm. The cathedral had grown impossibly quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Even Victoria's constant stream of accusations had momentarily ceased. Sarah, Michael started, his voice hoarse. Please, let's just handle this rationally. We can go to the bridal suite right now, look through everything together. Rationally? I cut him off, my voice rising. There's nothing rational about this situation, Michael. Your mother bursts into our wedding, accuses me of theft in front of everyone we know, and you want to act like this is some sort of… What? Minor misunderstanding? Rachel tugged gently at my arm. Come on, Sarah, let's get out of here. But I wasn't ready to leave, not yet. The anger that had been building inside me needed an outlet. You want to search my things? I turned to Victoria, who was still standing there with her perfectly arranged face twisted in disdain. Fine. Let's do it right now. In fact, why don't we make it a proper Newport spectacle? Everyone can come watch. Sarah, my father warned, but I was beyond caring about propriety now. I started walking toward the bridal suite, my wedding dress swishing angrily against the stone floor. The assembled guests parted like the Red Sea, some looking away in embarrassment, others watching with poorly concealed fascination. Michael hurried after me, still clutching my grandmother's pearls. "Wait," he called. "We should do this privately." "Privately?" I spun around so quickly he almost crashed into me. "Like how your mother privately accused me of being a thief in front of 300 people? That kind of privately?" We had reached the bridal suite, and I threw open the door with enough force to make it bang against the wall. The room looked exactly as I'd left it just 30 minutes ago. My overnight bag in the corner, my street clothes neatly folded on a chair, my makeup scattered across the antique vanity. Victoria pushed past me into the room, her eyes scanning, every surface like a prowling cat. "Check everything," she commanded, as if she were directing servants in her mansion. "Every bag, every pocket." "Mother, please," Michael said, but his protest was weak, perfunctory. He was still standing in the doorway, looking lost and uncertain, my grandmother's pearls clutched forgotten in his hand. Rachel and Emma had followed us in, along with my father and Michael's father Charles. The small room was crowded now, thick with tension and unspoken accusations. I watched as Victoria began rifling through my belongings, tossing aside my carefully packed clothes with little regard. "Be careful with that," Emma exclaimed as Victoria roughly handled the silk robe our mother had given me for the honeymoon. "Those aren't your things to manhandle." But Victoria ignored her, moving on to my makeup bag, dumping its contents onto the vanity. Mascara tubes and lipsticks rolled across the surface, some falling to the floor with quiet plastic clicks. "Enough!" My father's voice boomed in the small space. "This has gone too far!" "Michael, control your mother, or I'm calling the police myself. Not to report theft, but to report harassment." "Charles," Victoria appealed to her husband, "do something." Michael's father finally stepped forward, his lawyer's composure cracking slightly. "Victoria, perhaps we should—" "No!" Victoria's voice had taken on a slightly hysterical edge. "I will not let this gold digger get away with stealing my family's heritage. First the brooch, and next it'll be everything. Else, she's probably been planning this from the start, worming her way into our family." The crack of my palm against her cheek echoed through the room like a gunshot. I hadn't even realized I was going to slap her until it happened. Victoria staggered, back, her hand flying to her face, her eyes wide with shock. The room erupted into chaos. "How dare you!" Victoria shrieked, and before anyone could react, she lunged forward, her manicured nails raking across my face. I felt a sharp sting as they caught my cheek, and Rachel screamed. Michael finally sprang into action, grabbing his mother's arms and pulling her back. "Mother, stop! This is insane!" I touched my cheek and my fingers came away with traces of blood. My wedding makeup was ruined, and I could feel warm drops sliding down my face, staining the neckline of my white dress. "That's assault!" Emma cried out, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling the police right now." "Sarah struck me first." Victoria's voice was shrill. "I want her arrested. She's a thief, and now she's violent, too." I looked at Michael, still restraining his mother, and saw something in his eyes that broke what was left of my heart. It wasn't anger or sadness or even disappointment. It was resignation. He had already given up. On me, on us, on everything we had planned together. "Let her go," I said quietly, and everyone turned to look at me. "Let her go, Michael. Let everything go. The wedding is off." The world seemed to move in slow motion as Rachel and Emma helped me out of the cathedral's side entrance, away from the prying eyes and whispers. My face stung where Victoria's nails had left their mark, and I could feel warm drops of blood still trailing down my cheek. The perfect October day continued mockingly outside, golden sunshine, crisp autumn air, and the distant sound of waves that had seemed so peaceful just an hour ago. "We need to get you to the emergency room," Emma said, examining my face with concern. "Those scratches look deep." "No hospitals," I replied. my voice sounding distant and hollow to my own ears. I can't. I can't face anyone right now. The thought of sitting in an ER in my wedding dress, explaining what had happened, was unbearable. At least let me clean it properly, Rachel insisted, her nursing instincts taking over. I have a first aid kit in my car. We made our way to the parking lot, where my father was already waiting by his car, his face a storm cloud of barely contained rage. He had been on the phone, and I caught the end of his conversation as we approached. Yes, cancel everything. The reception, the honeymoon arrangements, all of it. He saw us and quickly ended the call. Princess, he said softly, the childhood nickname bringing fresh tears to my eyes. Let's get you home. The guests, I remembered suddenly. Someone needs to tell them. Charles is handling it, Rachel said, her voice tight with anger. It's the least they can do after what that family put you through. As if summoned by her words, I heard rapid footsteps behind us. Sarah, wait! Michael's voice sent a shaft of pain through my chest. I turned slowly, aware of how I must look with my torn dress, ruined makeup, and bloodied face. He stopped a few feet away, still holding my grandmother's pearls, his perfect tuxedo now rumpled and askew. Don't, my father warned, stepping between us. You've done enough damage. Please, Michael said, looking past him to me. Sarah, we can still fix this. Mother is... She's not well. She's been under a lot of stress lately, and with the wedding... Under stress? Emma's voice rose incredulously. She accused Sarah of theft and physically attacked her. And you're... making excuses? I'm not making excuses, Michael protested weakly. If we could all calm down, talk about this rationally. Rationally? I finally found my voice. Your mother destroyed our wedding, accused me of being a thief, attacked me, and you stood there watching it all happen. Tell me, Michael, what would be the rational response to that? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it hurt. I know it looks bad, but if you'd just let us search... Stop. I held up my hand. Just stop. The fact that you're still talking about... searching my things even now. I shook my head, wincing as the movement made my scratches sting. You know what? Keep the pearls. I nodded to my grandmother's necklace still clutched in his hand. Consider them payment for the brooch I supposedly stole. Sarah, don't be like this. Like what? I asked quietly. Like someone who just had their heart broken? Like someone who just watched the person they loved choose family money and status over trust and love? Like someone who just realized they were about to marry into a family that would never truly accept them? Rachel had returned with her first aid kit and was quietly cleaning the scratches on my face. The antiseptic stung, but it was nothing compared to the pain in my chest. Where is she? I asked suddenly. Your mother? Michael looked uncomfortable. Father took her home. She was upset. Upset, I repeated the word like it was in a foreign language. Was she upset when she was going through my things like I was some kind of criminal? Was she upset when she was screaming accusations in front of everyone I know? Or did she only get upset when I finally stood up to her? You slapped her, Michael reminded me, a hint of accusation in his voice. And there it is. I laughed, but it came out more like a sob. You're more concerned about me slapping your mother than about her destroying our wedding and attacking me. That's all I need to know about where your loyalties lie. Sarah. Go home, Michael, my father interrupted. Go home to your mother. Go back to your perfect Newport world where everything is about family names and antique brooches and keeping up appearances, but stay away from my daughter. Michael stood there for a moment longer, looking lost and young in the autumn sunlight. Finally, he placed my grandmother's pearls carefully on the hood of my father's car. Without another word, He turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As we watched him disappear back into the cathedral, I felt something inside me break and reshape itself. The Sarah who had walked into that church this morning, full of hope and love and dreams of a perfect future, was gone. In her place was someone else, someone stronger, perhaps, but also someone who would never trust quite so easily again. "Come on, sweetheart," my father said gently, opening the car door. "Let's go home." Home. But where was home now? The apartment Michael and I had bought together? The future we had planned? Everything I had thought was solid had turned to smoke and mirrors, disappearing like morning fog over the Newport harbor. 3 days after what the Newport Society columns tastefully referred to as my unexpectedly canceled wedding, I was curled up on Rachel's couch, wearing her old Yale sweatshirt and trying to avoid looking at my phone. The scratches on my face had started to heal, but the emotional wounds felt as raw as ever. The local news had picked up the story. Apparently, a society wedding ending and accusations of theft and violence was too juicy to ignore, and I'd been dodging reporters as well as well-meaning friends. "You need to eat something," Rachel said, placing a mug of tea and some toast in front of me. She had taken emergency leave from the hospital to stay with me, refusing to leave me alone, in what should have been my honeymoon week. "I'm not hungry," I mumbled, but picked up the tea anyway. My phone buzzed again, another call from Michael, his 20th since that day. I hit decline without hesitation. "He's persistent, I'll give him that," Rachel observed, sitting down beside me. "Yeah, well, persistence without courage doesn't count for much," I replied bitterly. The doorbell rang, making me jump. "If that's another reporter, I'll handle it," Rachel said, heading for the door. I heard murmured voices, then footsteps approaching the living room. When I looked up, I was shocked to see Charles Carson, Michael's father, standing there, looking uncomfortable in his perfectly tailored suit. "Sarah," he said quietly, "may I speak with you?" My first instinct was to refuse, to tell him to get out, but something in his expression made me pause. He looked tired, older somehow, and there was something in his hands, a familiar-looking jewelry box. "Fine," I said, sitting up straighter. "Say what you came to say." Charles cleared his throat, glancing at Rachel. "Perhaps we could speak privately." "Rachel stays," I said firmly. "I think we've all seen what happens when I face the Carson family alone." He nodded, accepting this. "Very well." He took a deep breath. "The brooch has been found." The words hung in the air for a moment before their meaning hit me. "What?" "Victoria's sapphire brooch," he clarified, though we all knew exactly which brooch he meant. It was in her jewelry box all along, in a hidden compartment she had forgotten about. I felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. "Forgotten," I repeated numbly. "She forgot where she put it?" Charles looked pained. "It's more complicated than that. Victoria has been struggling lately. Memory issues, mood swings. We've been keeping it private, but..." He sat heavily in an armchair. "She's been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. We got the confirmation 3 months ago." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. 3 months? But the wedding planning, all those meetings. "She has good days and bad days," Charles explained. I thought she was handling it well. Then she became fixated on wearing that brooch to the wedding. When she couldn't find it, that morning, something just snapped. Rachel spoke up, her medical training evident in her tone. "Early-onset Alzheimer's can cause paranoia and aggression, especially in stressful situations." "Yes," Charles agreed, "but that doesn't excuse what happened. What she did to you, Sarah. What we all did to you. It's unforgivable." I stood up abruptly, needing to move, to process. Does Michael know about the diagnosis? He does. Now. I told him everything after we found the brooch yesterday. He's not handling it well. The guilt, the realization that he chose, that he didn't stand by me. I finished for him. That he doubted me when I needed him most. Charles nodded sadly. He wants to speak with you, to apologize. No. The word came out sharper than I intended. No, I can't. I can't deal with his guilt right now, or his apologies. This doesn't change what happened. Sarah, do you know what hurts? The most? I interrupted, feeling tears start to well up again. It's not the accusations, or the scratches, or even the humiliation. It's that none of you, not Michael, not anyone in that church, stood up and said, "This isn't right." You all just watched, waited to see if maybe, just maybe, Victoria was right about me being a thief. We were wrong, Charles said simply. All of us. We let our family's reputation, our traditions, our fears cloud our judgment. And in doing so, we lost something far more valuable than any brooch. He placed the jewelry box on the coffee table. Victoria wanted me to bring this to you. On her lucid days, she remembers what happened. She's horrified. She wanted you to have the brooch, as some small gesture of apology. I stared at the box, remembering how this small piece of jewelry had destroyed everything I had dreamed of. I don't want it. I understand. Charles stood up slowly. For what it's worth, Sarah, you would have made our family better, stronger. What about Michael? Rachel asked quietly. What if he keeps trying to make things right? I closed the box with a decisive snap. Some things can't be made right. Sometimes trust, once broken, can't be repaired. I paused, realizing the truth as I spoke it. I think I need to focus on healing myself before I can even consider forgiving any of them. Walking back to the coffee table, I picked up Charles's letter and began to write on the back of it. My hand was steady now, my mind clear for the first time in days. What are you doing? Rachel asked. Writing to Michael. One letter, just like his father wrote one to me, explaining why I need to go, why I can't be the person they need me to be right now. The understanding ex-fiancé, the gracious victim of their family tragedy. I need to be Sarah again, just Sarah, without all their expectations and judgments. And the brooch? I looked at the jewelry box. I'm sending it back with the letter. They need it more than I do, not as a piece of jewelry, but as a reminder. A reminder that some things, once broken, can still be found, but other things. I touched the healing scratches on my face. Other things are lost forever. 2 weeks after Charles's visit, I stood in the international terminal of Boston Logan Airport, clutching my one-way ticket to Guatemala City. The past 14 days had been a whirlwind of preparations, resigning from the hospital, subletting my apartment, getting vaccinations, and saying goodbyes. Through it all, I had maintained radio silence with the Carson family, speaking only through my lawyer regarding the cancellation costs and property division. You've got everything? My father asked for the third time, trying to hide his worry behind practical concerns. Passport, vaccination records, emergency contacts? All here. I patted my travel document folder. And Dr. Martinez has arranged everything at the other end. I'll be staying at the mission compound until I find my own place. Emma hugged me tightly, her pregnant belly making it somewhat awkward. I still can't believe you're going to miss becoming an aunt, she sniffled. Little Sophie's going to have to meet her favorite aunt through video calls. I'll be back for the birth, I promised, though we all knew it wasn't certain. The medical mission was a 6-month commitment, with the possibility of extension. Part of me wondered if I would ever want to come back to Newport at all. Rachel, who had taken the morning off from her hospital shift to see me off, handed me a small package. "Don't open it until you're on the plane," she instructed. "It's just something to remind you of who you are when things get tough." I took the package, feeling tears threaten again. These 3 people, my father, sister, and best friend, had been my rocks through everything. They had helped me pack up the apartment I'd shared with Michael, intercepted well-meaning but painful wedding gifts being returned, and supported my decision to leave even though it hurt them to see me go. The airport speakers crackled with the first boarding call for my flight. "That's me," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Group A." "Sarah." My father's voice stopped me as I turned toward security. "You know you can always come home, right? Anytime, day, or night. Just say the word." I hugged him, breathing in the familiar scent of his aftershave mixed with coffee. "I know, Dad. But I need to do this. I need to find out who I am without." I trailed off, not wanting to say the names that still caused my heart to clench. "Without the weight of other people's expectations," he finished for me. "I understand, Princess. I just want you to remember that you have people who love you exactly as you are." The second boarding call echoed through the terminal. With final hugs and promises to call as soon as I landed, I made my way through security. As I waited in line to remove my shoes, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. The scratches on my face had healed to faint pink lines, barely visible unless you knew to look for them. Like so many scars, they would fade with time, but the memory of how they got there would remain. On the plane, settled into my window seat, I finally opened Rachel's package. Inside was a small photo album and a letter. The photos spanned years. Rachel and me in our nursing school graduation gowns, Emma and me making silly faces at her wedding, family Christmas celebrations, beach days, and quiet moments. The last page held a single photo I almost couldn't bear to look at. Me in my wedding dress, taken just minutes before everything fell apart. I looked radiant, hopeful, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Rachel's letter fell out as I closed the album. "Dear Sarah, I know you're running away. It's okay. Sometimes running away is actually running towards something better. But I wanted you to have these reminders of who you were before Newport society tried to remake you, before the Carsons, before that terrible day at the church. That girl in these photos? She's still in there. She's strong, compassionate, and brave. She doesn't need anyone's approval or permission to be amazing. I put the wedding dress photo in last for a reason. Not to hurt you, but to remind you that even in our darkest moments, we can still shine. You looked beautiful that day. But you know when you looked the strongest? When you stood up to them, when you chose yourself over their expectations. Guatemala isn't just an escape. It's an opportunity to be that strong woman again, without the shadow of Newport hanging over you. Help people, heal people, and most importantly, heal yourself. I love you, and I'm so proud of you. Rachel P.S. I may have booked a ticket to visit you in 3 months. You're not getting rid of me that easily. As the plane took off, I watched Newport disappear beneath the clouds. Somewhere down there was a family dealing with their own tragedy, a mother losing her memories, a son losing his way, and a sapphire brooch that had cost more than just its monetary value. But up here, above the clouds, I felt something I hadn't experienced since that day at the church. Hope. Guatemala wasn't just a destination. It was a chance to rebuild myself from the ground up. No society expectations, no family drama, just the pure, simple act of helping others heal while healing myself. As the coast of New England faded from view, I opened my medical mission briefing packet and began to read. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, that uncertainty felt like freedom rather than fear. The Guatemalan sun beat down on the small medical clinic as I finished stitching up a young boy's knee. "Listo, pequeño guerrero," I said, using one of the Spanish phrases I'd mastered in my 3 months here. The boy grinned bravely, accepted his lollipop, and scampered off to his waiting mother. "Your Spanish is getting better," Dr. Martinez commented, appearing beside me with 2 cups of coffee. "Though your accent still needs work." I accepted the coffee gratefully, savoring its rich local flavor. Better than my first week when I told that grandmother I needed to examine her butterfly instead of her stomach. We both laughed, remembering the confusion that had ensued. Those first weeks had been challenging. The language barrier, the culture shock, the stark difference between Newport's gleaming hospital corridors and our modest clinic in the mountains. But somehow, those very challenges had become my salvation. "Sarah," Dr. Martinez said, her tone growing serious, "I got a call from the hospital board this morning. They're impressed with the work we've been doing here, especially your initiative with the mobile vaccination program. They want to extend our funding for another year." I felt my heart leap. The mobile vaccination program had been my idea, reaching out to remote villages instead of waiting for people to come to us. It had meant long days, rough roads, and countless challenges, but the impact was undeniable. "Are you offering me an extension?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "A full year, if you want it. I know you originally signed up for 6 months, and your time's almost halfway done, but—" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Yes, I want to stay." Dr. Martinez smiled knowingly. "I thought you might say that. You found something here, haven't you?" I looked around the clinic, at the worn but clean floors, the basic equipment we used so carefully, the waiting room full of patients who had walked hours to see us. "I found myself," I said quietly. "The person I was always meant to be before I got caught up in trying to be someone else." Later that evening, in my small but comfortable apartment above the clinic, I opened my laptop to find several new emails. One from Emma with ultrasound pictures of baby Sophie, another from Rachel confirming her visit next month, and one from Michael. My finger hovered over the delete button, but something made me pause. In 3 months, I had deleted every message from him unread, returned every letter unopened. But tonight, feeling secure in who I was and what I was doing, I found the strength to click. "Dear Sarah, I don't know if you're reading these emails, but I need to tell you about something that happened today. Mother had another episode. Worse than before. She became convinced that someone had stolen her memories again. But this time, when we found her crying in her room, she was holding the sapphire brooch and saying your name. Not in anger, but in sorrow. 'I ruined it,' she kept saying. 'I ruined that poor girl's life because I couldn't remember where I put a piece of jewelry.' The doctors say her lucid moments are becoming rarer, but in those moments, her regret is profound. I share that regret, Sarah, but for different reasons. I regret not being the man you needed me to be, the man who should have stood by you without question. I saw your name in a medical journal today, an article about rural healthcare initiatives in Guatemala. You're doing amazing things, things that matter. I'm proud of you, even though I have no right to be. I'm not asking for forgiveness or another chance. I just wanted you to know that you were always enough, exactly as you were. I was the one who wasn't enough, wasn't strong enough to stand up to my family, wasn't wise enough to see what really mattered. Be well, Sarah. Michael. I closed the laptop, walking to my small balcony that overlooked the mountains. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of cooking fires and blooming flowers from the village below. 3 months ago, this message would have devastated me. Now it felt like closing a chapter in a book, sad, but with the satisfaction of completion. My phone buzzed with a text from Lucia, one of the local nurses who had become a close friend. Celebrating my sister's engagement tonight. Come dance with us. I smiled, remembering my first weeks here when I couldn't imagine ever wanting to be near anything wedding-related again. But Lucia and her family had shown me a different kind of celebration, one based on love and community rather than social status and family heirlooms. "On my way," I texted back, then quickly changed into a bright dress I had bought at the local market. As I caught my reflection in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The faint scars on my face had faded, but more than that, I looked peaceful, happy. The weight of trying to fit into Newport society had lifted, replaced by the simple joy of being useful, of making a difference. Walking down the mountain path toward Lucia's family home, I thought about Dr. Martinez's offer. Another year here meant missing more of baby Sophie's firsts, meant more time away from my family and friends. But it also meant more opportunities to help, to heal, to grow. The sound of music and laughter drifted up from the village, and I quickened my pace. Behind me, the clinic stood silhouetted against the sunset, and ahead, a future I had never imagined beckoned. Sometimes I realized what feels like the end of everything is really just the beginning of something better. "Feliz cumpleaños, Doctora Sarah." The chorus of voices made me jump as I walked into the clinic one morning, 6 months into my time in Guatemala. The waiting room had been transformed. Colorful streamers hung from the ceiling, a hand-painted banner stretched across the wall, and the entire staff, along with several regular patients, stood grinning at my surprise. Lucia rushed forward to hug me. "Did you think we would forget your birthday?" "I didn't even remember it myself," I admitted, touched by the gesture. And it was true. I had been so immersed in our work, in our latest mobile clinic initiative, that I'd completely forgotten what day it was. Dr. Martinez emerged from the crowd carrying a cake decorated with fresh flowers. "Make a wish," she said, her eyes twinkling. As I looked around at these people who had become my second family, I realized I didn't need to wish for anything. The past 6 months had given me more than I could have ever imagined that day I fled. Newport. Later that evening, after a day of celebrations mixed with our usual patient care, I sat in my favorite spot on the clinic's roof, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Rachel, who had arrived yesterday for her promised visit, joined me with 2 glasses of wine. "So," she said, settling beside me, "this is your life now." I smiled, hearing the question in her statement. "It is. The board approved my extension yesterday. I'm staying another year." Rachel nodded, unsurprised. "I had a feeling you would. You're different here, Sarah. Stronger. More. You." "I know what you mean," I said, taking a sip of wine. "Remember how I used to worry about wearing the right clothes to Newport Society events? About saying the right things to impress Victoria? Now I spend my days in scrubs, covered in dust from village roads, speaking broken Spanish, and I've never felt more authentic." "Speaking of Newport," Rachel hesitated, "I should probably tell you. Michael got engaged." I waited for the pain, the jealousy, the regret, any of the emotions I might have expected to feel at this news. Instead, I felt a gentle acceptance. To someone from the right social circle, I assume? Caroline Astor Blake. Their engagement was announced in the Newport Society pages last week. I couldn't help but laugh. Of course, Victoria must be thrilled in her lucid moments. "You're really okay with this?" Rachel studied my face carefully. "I am," I said, realizing it was completely true. "You know, when I first came here, I was running away from the pain, the humiliation, the broken dreams. But somewhere along the way, I stopped running from and started running toward this life, these people, this work that means something real." As if to emphasize my point, a commotion arose from below. One of our regular patients, Maria, was in labor 2 weeks early. I watched our team spring into action with practiced efficiency, preparing the delivery room we'd set up in what used to be a storage closet. "I should go," I said, standing up. "Maria specifically asked for me to be there." Rachel grabbed my arm before I could leave. Sarah, wait. There's something else you should know about Michael's engagement. Emma told me. Apparently, Victoria had another episode at the engagement party. She got confused, started asking where you were, saying they needed your help with a patient. She thought she was back in time when you were still working at Newport Hospital. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, but it was different now. Not the pain of lost love, but compassion for a woman losing herself piece by piece. The mind is a strange thing, I said softly. Sometimes I think Victoria's confused moments speak more truth than her lucid ones ever did. A call from below interrupted us. "Doctora Sarah, the baby is coming." "Go," Rachel said, smiling. "Be the doctor you were always meant to be." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Maria's labor was complicated, but our team worked seamlessly together. When her healthy baby girl finally arrived just after midnight, the look of joy and gratitude on her face reminded me exactly why I had chosen this path. "She wants to name the baby Sarah," Lucia translated for me, grinning. "After you." I felt tears well up in my eyes as I helped settle the tiny namesake into her mother's arms. This moment, this real, raw, beautiful moment, was worth more than all the Newport society parties, more than any sapphire brooch or family name. Later, exhausted but happy, I returned to my apartment to find an email from Emma. She had attached new ultrasound pictures of baby Sophie, due in just 2 months. "We miss you," she wrote, "but we're so proud of who you've become." Looking at the ultrasound, I made a decision. I would go back for Sophie's birth, would hold my niece and hug my family. But I would return to Guatemala afterward, to my clinic. My patients, my purpose. Newport was my past, a past that had shaped me but no longer defined me. This mountain village, with its dusty roads and warm-hearted people, was my present and future. The morning sun began to peek over the mountains, signaling the start of another day. Soon the clinic would fill with patients, each bringing their own stories, their own needs. And I would be there, not as the almost Mrs. Carson, not as the victim of a wedding day scandal, but as Doctora Sarah, exactly who I was always meant to be. 1 year to the day after my almost wedding, I stood in the delivery room of Newport General Hospital, holding my newborn niece Sophie in my arms. The timing seemed poetic somehow. Exactly 1 year after the day that had broken me. Here I was, whole again, celebrating new life and new beginnings. "She has your eyes," Emma said tiredly from her hospital bed, watching me with her daughter. "The same sparkle." I smiled, gently rocking Sophie. "Let's hope she has your common sense," I teased. Mine took a while to develop. My 2-week visit to Newport had been surprisingly peaceful. The city that had once felt like a gilded cage now seemed smaller somehow, less intimidating. I walked its familiar streets with the confidence of someone who no longer needed its approval, ate at my old favorite diner without worrying who might see me there, and even ran into a few members of the Carson family's social circle without feeling the need to hide. The night before I was due to return to Guatemala, my father hosted a small dinner at our family home. Rachel was there, along with Emma and her husband, and several close friends who had stood by me through everything. As we sat in the backyard under strings of twinkling lights, sharing stories and laughter, my father raised his glass for a toast. "To my daughter," he said, his voice full of emotion, "who turned what seemed like an ending into a beginning. Who reminded us all that sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead us to our best selves." Later that evening, as I helped clear the dishes, Rachel pulled me aside. "I saw Michael yesterday," she said carefully, "at the hospital. Victoria had another bad episode." I paused, plates in hand. "How is she?" "Declining rapidly. He asked about you, not in a romantic way," she added quickly. "He wanted to know if you were happy, if you had found what you were looking for." "What did you tell him?" I showed him the article about your clinic in the medical journal, the one about revolutionizing rural healthcare access. His face when he read it. Rachel smiled. I think he finally understood that losing you was the best thing that ever happened to you. The next morning, as my flight to Guatemala was boarding, I received a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of the infamous sapphire brooch, now displayed in a small memory care facility's cabinet. Below it was a plaque that read, "Donated by the Carson family to support Alzheimer's research, in honor of those who help us remember what truly matters." The message below the photo was simple. "You taught us more than you'll ever know. Thank you. C." Charles's final goodbye, perhaps, or his way of showing that some good had come from all the pain. As my plane took off, I thought about how life's greatest plot twists rarely lead us where we expect. A year ago, I had boarded a plane running away from pain, from betrayal, from a life that had crumbled around me. Now, I was flying toward something, toward my clinic in the mountains, toward the mobile medical programs I was developing, toward a future I had chosen for myself. My phone buzzed with a message from Lucia. "Hurry back, Doctora. Little Sarah took her first steps today, and Maria says you're the only one allowed to give her first-year checkup." I smiled, thinking of my tiny namesake and all the other patients who had become family. The scratches on my face had faded completely now, leaving no visible scars. But some scars, I had learned, were meant to change us, not as reminders of pain, but as markers of growth, of resilience, of the strength we never knew we had. The sapphire brooch that had once seemed important enough to destroy a wedding now helped fund research for others suffering like Victoria. The society circles that had once seemed like the pinnacle of success now felt small compared to the joy of delivering babies in mountain villages. And the love I had thought would break me had instead broken me open, allowing me to become someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more real. As the plane rose above the clouds, I opened my laptop to review plans for our newest medical initiative. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patients, new opportunities to make a difference. And I was ready for all of it. Not as the girl who had once tried to fit into Newport society, not as the bride who had been humiliated at the altar, but as the woman who had found her true calling in the most unexpected way. Sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as its greatest trials. My wedding day had ended in chaos and accusations, but it had also ended in freedom. Freedom to discover who I really was, what I really wanted, and where I really belonged. And that, I realized as I watched the sunrise from 30,000 feet, was worth more than all the sapphire brooches in the world. We were just too blind to see it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This is a letter, explaining everything. What to expect with the disease, why we kept it secret. Michael doesn't know I'm giving it to you. Do with it what you will." He placed the envelope next to the jewelry box and turned to leave. At the doorway, he paused. "The brooch wasn't the only family treasure we lost that day," he said quietly. "We lost you. And that's a far greater loss than Victoria's ever imagined." After Charles left, I sat staring at the envelope and jewelry box on the coffee table for what felt like hours. The pristine white envelope seemed to mock me with its weight of explanations and apologies, while the antique box containing the sapphire brooch represented everything that had gone wrong in my life. "Do you want me to read it first?" Rachel offered gently, gesturing to the letter. She had been quietly supportive through Charles's visit, but I could sense her own internal struggle with this new information. "No," I said, finally reaching for the envelope. "I need to do this myself." My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal and unfolded the expensive stationery. The letter was long, detailed, and heartbreaking. Victoria's diagnosis had come shortly after our engagement. The early symptoms had been subtle: forgotten appointments, misplaced items, occasional confusion. But as the wedding preparations intensified, so did her symptoms. The doctors had warned the family about stress being a trigger, but they had all convinced themselves they could handle it, could keep it private until after the wedding. "Oh my God," I whispered, reaching a particular passage. "The day she showed me her jewelry safe. She writes here that sometimes she doesn't remember entire conversations or events from the same day." Rachel moved closer, reading over my shoulder. "That explains why she was so convinced you had seen the combination. In her confused state, she probably mixed up memories." I continued reading, learning how Victoria had started having paranoid episodes, becoming increasingly convinced that people were trying to steal her memories along with her possessions. The brooch had become a fixation point, a tangible link to her past that she could still hold on to, even as her mind began to betray her. "She writes that she's sorry," I said, my voice catching. "That on her clear days she remembers everything and the guilt is overwhelming." I put down the letter, unable to read more through my tears. "Sarah," Rachel said carefully, "this explains her actions, but it doesn't excuse what everyone else did, especially Michael." She was right, of course. The revelation of Victoria's illness cast her actions in a new, tragic light, but it didn't change the fundamental breach of trust that had occurred. Michael's failure to stand by me, the family's immediate assumption of my guilt, the way they had all watched my humiliation without intervention. None of that was explained away by Victoria's condition. My phone buzzed again. Michael, for the 21st time. This time, though, I found myself staring at his name on the screen, thinking about what he must be going through, learning about his mother's diagnosis, dealing with the guilt of his actions, watching his perfect world crumble just as mine had. "Don't," Rachel warned, seeing my expression. "Don't let yourself feel responsible for their pain." "I'm not," I said, declining the call once again. "But I need to figure out what to do with all of this information. I can't just pretend I don't know." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the autumn evening settling over the city. The same trees that had seemed so perfect and promising on my wedding day now shed their leaves like tears of gold and red. "I think," I said slowly, "I need to leave Newport." Rachel looked surprised. "Leave? But your job? Your life here?" "My job where everyone knows me as the nurse who was accused of theft at her own wedding? My life where I can't go anywhere, without whispers and stares?" I turned back to her. "I can't heal here, Rachel. Not with all these reminders. Not with the constant possibility of running into them at every society event or charity function." "Where would you go?" I thought about it for a moment. "Remember Dr. Martinez? The trauma surgeon I worked with during my residency? She's running a medical mission in Guatemala now. She's been trying to recruit me for months." "Guatemala?" Rachel's eyes widened. That's not just leaving Newport. That's leaving the country. Maybe that's what I need." I picked up the jewelry box, opening it to look at the infamous brooch for the first time. It was beautiful, certainly. Sapphires and diamonds set in intricate Victorian metalwork. But as I looked at it, I felt nothing but a deep sadness for how something so small could cause so much pain.